Welcome back to Missing. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. I truly love when we have a guest on the show that is so genuinely passionate about the stories that they cover. Getting into it in this industry and doing it in a podcast form is something that people have to adapt to. And I think this guest has managed to balance the investigative part and the media part really well, even though admittedly he says he hates talking about himself, but the information that he has is really so important to the families of these people that he covers. But Tim, it's important to me to know how good you are today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for asking. And yeah, we're lucky enough to introduce this conversation that we had with David Ridgen, who is the producer, host, and writer of CBC's Someone Knows Something. And all that makes him a bit of a podcast legend, Lance, especially in the true crime field, because Someone Knows Something is really an epic podcast, and it's got, I think it spans 9 seasons, and his new season is out November 6th, 2024, so just came out. And this season is about the disappearance of Christine Harron from Hanover, Ontario in the spring of 1993.
And if you want to learn more about David, you can go to his website at ridgenfilm.com. That's RIDGEN film.com. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. And Tim, we're doing this thing where after a conversation like this, you and I listen back, we realize we have a lot of thoughts on this. So why don't we provide our final thoughts at the end of these conversations, because our thoughts typically align with the listeners. So if you're hearing some stuff in this conversation and things are firing in your brain, most likely they're firing in our brains as well. So stay tuned at the conclusion for our little wrap up that we're really enjoying doing so far.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with David Ridgen. Welcome to the podcast, David Ridgen. How are you today?
I am great from my boathouse here in Arnprior, Ontario.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So you are speaking to us from across the border, our friends up north. That's awesome. We love you all up there. And you are such a prolific filmmaker, journalist, investigative journalist. For those who don't know you, can you give a little bit of background aside from your fantastic boathouse?
Well, those who do know me know that me talking about myself is probably the worst question to start with. But anyways, so I'm David Ridgen. I'm a journalist, supposed journalist up here in Canada. I work for the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, as public broadcaster. But I started out as a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. I've made dramas. I've worked in investigative probably since 2004, looking into cold cases, coldish cases. And was working for television for probably till about 2010, 2011, and then left and decided to walk away from cold cases and investigation because it was too difficult for many reasons, which you probably talk about on your show. And then CBC asked me to come back and develop a podcast. And so I said, okay, let's do that, because it sounded like a good idea. It sounded like audience was there. It sounded like, more importantly, that it could be something that would help cases in a different way. Police seem to be interested in working with people like that. Family members seem to be interested. So I went back to CBC and developed Someone Knows Something, which is a podcast CBC does with me. And it became what it became. Now we're in season 9, coming out in early November.
Wow, truly incredible. The show is amazing. I've been listening from the beginning. I know a lot of our audience has too. If you can, just tell us a little bit about the show. Do you do a different case every season? Is that how it works?
Yes, a different case every season. Someone Knows Something. I've also done, during the COVID period, I did The Next Call, which is a phone call-based investigation, which actually was interesting. It actually was very fruitful. People would reveal many things without even being on their doorstep. But yes, so Someone Knows Something. I work with family members, exclusively, always work with the family members, family of the missing or murdered person or persons, and look back at the case in a way that they weren't or haven't done in the past. The show is, I always say it's not a true crime show. I always say it's like a personal healing show. So a process, really. It's like a process of healing for the people that participate in it, myself included. So family members often or always go through a lot of trauma, as we all do. People lose people every day. I mean, we lose each other. We're all going to die, right? So, but in cases of murder, it's a different kind of loss, a different kind of trauma. There's a suddenness to it. There's no answers. There's answers that you can't find, and it's often a dark place that, even though they're confronted with it every day, family members have never actually gone there. They don't actually know. They've never been given the information by police, or never been privy to what's actually been going on in the case. So I enter the scene, work with family to bring them into those spaces where they've never been or never wanted to go before, and yet which constantly troubles them. Those questions, the guilt that they feel: why wasn't I there to help them that day? How come I let them play in the park that day? How come? So I bring them into that, nice guy that I am. And it's kind of like throwing someone into an elevator that's afraid of elevators. It's like ripping off the Band-Aid to make the wound heal better. So that's the process that I take people through, and someone knows something. And that's a process where we'll be confronting, and sometimes it's sometimes it's just me, confronting people that we think are suspects in the case, somebody who may know something about what happened to the person who's missing or murdered, and often working with police as well, and looking at various suspects, always dispelling rumors. There's always rumors around these cases that are also hurtful and important to get rid of. And these days, it's actually a lot more difficult because there's a lot of citizen scientists, citizen sleuths who are sort of trying to solve cases from their home. And some of them are good at it, but some of them kind of get in the way of investigation as well. So it's harder now to knock on a door that hasn't been either knocked on before, or that you've knocked on and then 100 people come after you and knock on it and then create a situation where it kind of poisons the facts a little bit. So it's difficult with so many people trying to solve the same case, kind of thing. But anyway, that was a bigger answer than you wanted. But Someone Knows Something is like looking back at cases with family members to seek healing for them in the process, and hopefully find some answers and maybe even courtroom justice.
No, that was a great answer. You can go on and on all you want. That's amazing information there, and they really opened up a lot of doors for other questions. You started right at the top by saying that you look back at the case the way they haven't, and I'm assuming you mean family and law enforcement and other investigators when you say they. How hard is that to do when you deal with cases? Just going through your shows and your seasons, they're not very recent. I think you only have a couple that are like within the past 5 years or so, but you're talking about ones from the 80s and 90s and the 60s.
Yeah,
I mean, how difficult is it where you have to go to law enforcement or family and say, for 40 years, no one has looked at it like this? Like, how do you approach that?
Every case has information that goes by the wayside because the investigators either don't have time or they are too focused on another direction. So tunnel vision, etc. They get an idea in their head, this has to be the solution, and they follow that. So information goes by the wayside, and that's the information I mine. Anything that never really took hold at the time of the investigation, sometimes things that did, that information becomes much more available as cases get older too. So the older the case, it's actually better because law enforcement's more interested in sharing, because they don't care anymore. It's like the people that first worked on it, who are the most passionate about it, are already dead, or, on the golf course or whatever. Or they have their box of files in the barn that they'll share with me. Whereas the new recent cases, there's sort of still a slim, hope, or a sliver of hope that there's going to be a solution. So they may not participate, or law enforcement may not help as much in those cases. I may get a thin binder or a thin folder, whereas the 1964 case, Mississippi, which you're referring to, the Klan case, the Klan murder of Henry D. and Charles Moore, that case, I have a closet full of documents. Like I have tens of thousands of pages of documents from that. And it's not just they gave it to me. I found it. It was available for finding the older it becomes. So the stuff that falls by the wayside gets documented to some extent. And the thing is with police is they go to a door and they knock on it and the person says, I don't want to talk to you. And that's it. They have to leave. They have to walk away. So they have a paragraph in their file about this person they talked to. I don't have to leave, and I can keep going back. Like, they can tell me to go, and there are rules about how I have to leave and start backing away and all this stuff. Usually, though, I don't get that kind of aggressiveness from people when I go to their doorstep. So even people that actually murdered somebody, I've been in talking to them and having coffee with them. So there's a way to approach people. There's a way to talk to people that police may not have. They have a uniform, they have a gun. I got me and a shotgun microphone, and that's about it, right? And my love of dogs or whatever, So it's like, you just you expect that people are going to want to unload, and they do. And it's that expectation that brings that luck. Like, it brings the luck of people talking to you. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't even know if it answers your question. But
you're far too humble on your answers, or on your follow up to your answers. You answer questions so thoroughly it's wonderful.
Now, you noted that you always work with the family members of the victims. Can you tell us why that is?
I didn't start thinking I'll work with the family members because it's proof against exploitation, because that's the big thing leveled against podcasters is, oh, you're just exploiting, you're making lots of money off of. Some people think I make millions of dollars. Maybe if I was in the States, I'd be making millions of dollars. That's not the case in public broadcasting, let me tell you. But working with family is obvious for storytelling. I mean, it's like in any kind of screenplay, you want to see someone change from the beginning to the end. And it's an obvious story arc to have a family member who is pushing people away, won't talk to people, alcoholic possibly, self-immolating, has some kind of problem associated with having to reorganize their whole life around this loss, right? And they make it their vocation. It's like, my vocation is solving this crime because I caused it, or it's my fault. So you have this amazing character who has a lot of issues. You have a weirdo like me who comes in and who also probably gets as much help from the family as I do they get from me. And then we kind of go together on this journey. It's like a hero's journey kind of thing, screenplay wise. I think of it in screenplays. And you go through these hurdles and you go into the depths of Valhalla, or no, Hades, I guess. And then you come back out and you have victory no matter what. You're always finding victory in these cases because they've confronted it in a way they never did before. There's always going to be a positive change in the person. I found that in every case, every family member I've worked with. So from a storytelling point of view, it's money, like it's gold, right? And I don't mean the monetary sense of it. I just mean it's amazing to listen to that, and I think inspiring. And you always get that. And whether you're in a courtroom and you hear the gavel fall or not, you're always going to get to that situation where the person is bettered through that process, and myself included. Hopefully the audience gets something out of that as well. So working with family is important to follow that journey that they're on. And sometimes they don't realize the journey that they were on. Like, that fruition doesn't happen until a few years later. So with 1964, Thomas Moore, who went with me back to Mississippi to look at the case of his brother, Charles Moore, and his friend Henry D. Thomas was the quintessential family member, just pushing people away. He was guilty because he was away at the Army training camp at Fort Hood when he should have been with his brother. This is him thinking, I should have been there to protect him. I was his protector, and I wasn't there. So he has this guilt, and he's that quintessential person who has never confronted the case, never been allowed to, never given the information, or never found the information. So I'm just there as a facilitator for Thomas, and we went through that journey together. And at the beginning, he was very, very enclosed, very much like this. You can almost physically see him like this. And at the end, he's calling me his brother, and we're calling each other his brother. I'm just talking about observationally what we're doing. I'm not facetiously talking about it. And at the end, we're actually our brothers. And it's like 14 years later, he's meeting the person who killed his brother through this process and shaking his hand and accepting his apology for killing his brother and singing America 'Tis of Thee in the church with him. And that's the process that this took him through, right? And myself, I went through it too. It's not like I was just observing or controlling some gears or something. It's a process that we both go through. And that's why someone knows something is impossible to duplicate because no one's as dumb as that. No one's as stupid to hang around for 15 years for a case to get done, and that's how long it takes sometimes. But the process is what's important, and involving family, you see that process in them every time.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was season 3 of Someone Knows Something, when you revisited that world, when you went to revisit 1964 Mississippi. How much did you know about that in the South in the 60s, given that you're a Canadian citizen? And was any of it shocking? Was any of it something that you expected?
Season 3 was incredibly listened to across the world, especially in the States. As a Canadian, we were actually Canadian media at the time was quite involved in the sort of civil rights era in the States. There was a lot of coverage, especially some of the shows that CBC ran at the time. This Hour is 7 Days is the name of one of them they did a documentary in the South that I watched, and it has mention of the Dean Moore case, very oblique mentions. But then that's what led me to the idea of doing the case, is because these were the forgotten bodies of 1964. Nobody cared because they weren't, the 3 civil rights workers, for example. But in terms of surprise, I'm not surprised. I drive around Ontario, which is where I live in Ontario, Canada, and I've seen 4 different towns with Confederate flags flying in them, for example, even like this year. And it's like, I don't think that people must understand what they're flying or why they're flying it. But the kind of racism and the kind of post-colonial attitude really is rampant, and it's a struggle that's ongoing. And I don't think it's something that I was surprised at. I mean, the level of violence always is surprising in the South that was going on at the time. What was surprising was that a lot of the Klansmen that I was looking into, the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, which is the more violent section of the Klan, the United Klans of America as well. But the White Knights, the WKKK, were basically returning soldiers, a lot of them. A lot of them are Korean War veterans. And they had learned a lot of the techniques they used in the Klan during the Korean War. So they actually had communications devices they had borrowed from local sort of, I don't know what you call them down there, but where the guys go and march around, like the sort of drill halls and things like that. So they would go and use the same kinds of equipment that they had been trained on in Korea and before that even, and came back together in similar type of units. Like the units would organize in a similar kind of way, hierarchically. So there was a lot of informed sort of military training there, which is interesting. It's like, so they're away fighting for the whatever, United States or freedom or whatever the heck it was. And then they came back and it was, well, that wasn't our free. These guys are impinging on that freedom somehow. The African Americans are impinging on that freedom. So I was just surprised that there was this kind of military sort of element. That's what was surprising to me. It's been a long time since I've done the research into that case. It's been many years actually, but it's still ingrained in my head. So I've forgotten some of the aspects that were surprising, but that was one thing I can remember.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And you mentioned citizen sleuths and how there are more of them nowadays with the internet, and some of them are good at it, and some of them can be harmful. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between those two? It's
hard to say. There's been citizen sleuthness going on for a long time. But in terms of, once podcasts started to take off, like podcasts like mine and Serial, et cetera, early days, I'm an early days crime podcast, basically. It kind of exploded, the internet armchair sleuths. And I'm not pooching them en masse, on bank or whatever. I think that there's some use in having lots of, just like citizen science is amazing. I think it's great that people have this activism and sort of agency, that they feel that they can help and they want to help. And that's the urge, is to help somebody, which is awesome. Sometimes though, that goes down different trails. Some of them go down paths of like psychics, psychics who are trying to help, but they're really actually besmirching any factual evidence in the case and actually ruining the lives of family members by pretending that they're hearing people speaking from beyond and things like that. I'm an anti guy. Like I'm an anti person on that front. So I'm not going to sort of rose-colored glasses psychics, but even just people trying to help. If you can imagine a case where there's like 16 people, all of them who believe someone did it, and all trying to confront that same person. When I come along, for example, it makes it more difficult. Like, I can't knock on the door fresh. Like, he's already talked to 5 people that already told him stuff about the case, like didn't keep or conceal the information like I would. They just brought it out to them. So then you've got a kind of poisoned case. Like, you've got a case where facts or so-called facts are kind of populating the community in a way that tends to poison it. So it's kind of like if I interview somebody and then I tell the family member what that person said, that family member is probably going to go tell somebody, right? And then in the community. And eventually that information from what that person told me gets into the community. And then I go and interview somebody else in the community and I'm fed back the information that I heard already. So it's confirmation bias, right? So I'm confirming what this person already said. Just imagine 16 people trying that. So then you start to make a rumor mill, right? You're starting to create this rumor mill of fact, which is not fact. So it's harder to find what I would say is sort of a case that hasn't been affected by others trying to trample all over it. I mean, it's not like I'm the best and get out of my way and you guys need to shut up or Dave Ridgen can't get the case done. But that's what happens. It just makes it so. In the sort of selection process, I think about that. How many people are on this case, officially and unofficially? How many people, and are the family members working with them? And if not, then that's fine. If I'm the one working with the family members, that's fine. Everybody else can do their own thing. But if there's, if the family member's divided between about 6 other people, then I probably won't do the case. It has to be kind of exclusive. I mean, and maybe that's crass, but that's how I do it.
No, not crass at all. You got to be sure that you're entering into something with clarity and transparency, and that's the only way you can do your business.
I think so. I mean, you have to look at viability, and is there something value added I can do? Is there a viable suspect? Is the time going to be worth it for everybody to work on this? Because it's a long time. I don't go away, right? Like I'm still working with Thomas Moore, and we still talk on the phone. And I met him in 2004, and this case is solved, and he's already forgiven the guy who killed his brother. Like, what's more to do, dude? But I'm still communicating, and there is more to do because there's other cases. And as it turns out, some of the interviews we did with old Klansmen, some of the stuff those guys said is interesting for other cases, right? So that happens across the board. But with those old cases, it's interesting because, Charles Edwards, the Klansman we were talking to, had been given immunity and he felt much more at ease. And he was talking very freely about cases in ways that weren't broadcast. Like us guys, we didn't broadcast a lot of that interview. But it's important to sort of have an exclusivity with these folks, right? And it makes them comfortable to talk. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think armchair sleuths are ruining cases all around the world all the time, but I do think that there's potential for that for sure.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about Christine Harron's disappearance?
Christine Harron was 15 years old. She lived in a town called Hanover, Ontario, which is southwest Ontario. It was sort of a furniture manufacturing place in Ontario way back, and sort of around 93 when Christine disappeared, it was kind of, I think a lot of that had gone overseas. So it was a lot of abandoned buildings and kind of a main street that had been abandoned. And so just a small town that had been former glory, I guess is what I would say. Chrissy I call her Chrissy, her mom calls her Chrissy. So Chrissy was 15 years old, May 18th, 1993. She was kind of rebellious. Chrissy wore glasses. She had curly, dark hair, and skinny little thing. Didn't like school, had an argument with her mother that day on May 18th, didn't feel well. And I think a truant officer called eventually, where's Chrissy? There was a big argument. Eventually, Chrissy left home about noon to 1 o'clock, and said, I'm going to school. Okay, door slams. And the mom, Marianne, sees Chrissy walk down the street and disappear around the corner. And that's it. Never sees her again. And the case stayed that way, basically, until 2004. But up until 2004, there'd been 2 police departments investigating the case, the Hanover local police, who tried their best. And the Ontario Provincial Police took it over in 1999 and reinvestigated the case, re-interviewed the same people and a few other people. Still couldn't find anything. Still thought, who knows what happened to Chrissy. At one point, the local police said she was just a runaway, which is very common in cases. It's like, oh, she's a runaway, don't worry about it. 2 years later, what happened? So 2004, the case changes a bit. A man comes forward and says, I killed Chrissy. A guy named Anthony Edward Ringel, who would have been 24 at the time Chrissy disappeared in 1993, but aged 35 in August 2004, comes forward at a party and starts telling his relatives that he killed Christine Harron. So he'd been, I guess, having some drinks. There was some marijuana being smoked. And there was some kind of argument at the party that Anthony was at the time. So he just, at this party, came up with this idea that he had killed Christine. So he called 911, which is the emergency number, and then decided to hang up. And police responded, OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, came to this party where Anthony was and said, what's going on? We had a call that there was but someone hung up. And then Anthony walks down the stairs outside this house. It was like a house with a stairs, sort of fire escape outside. And Anthony came down, he held his hands up like this, and he said, arrest me. I did it. I killed Chrissy. I killed Christine. And he put his hands up as if to be cuffed. And so he confesses to the police. And the police take him to the precinct and put him in a room, an interrogation room, and interrogate him. And he eventually starts to tell them that he killed Christine, what he did that day, May 18th, where he met her, what he did with her. And so there's a trial. And the trial goes forward. This is May, I think it was 2006, actually, June 2006. Trial goes forward, and Anthony Edward Ringel gets off because of police malfeasance. They did not investigate the case properly. So I think it was May 2009. It's all in May. May 2009, I take interest in the case. This is like 3 years after Anthony gets off, after saying I did it May 2004 or August 2004. And I start to work with Christine's mother, Marianne Russworm is her name, not Heron. And we work on a program together and go and interview people. And together we go and talk to Anthony Ringel, who's just been living in town. No journalist has gone to speak to this guy. This is a case where no citizen sleuth deigned to become involved and go talk to this guy who admitted to killing Christine Harron so many years ago. And we ended up so that I was the one who was able to talk to him. He didn't want to talk to Marianne when we went, so I went on my own later and met him at a trailer park and spoke to him at length, this guy who had said he killed Christine Harron. And then I think it was about 2012, so May 2012, CBC releases the documentary that I made with Marianne. This is a television documentary that I made at the time. This is not SKS. And we released the documentary. And a couple of months after the documentary comes out, the police start an undercover operation on Anthony Ringel in the same trailer park that I met him in. So the feeling is that this spurred the police into action again, embarrassed them, because basically the documentary goes through all the malfeasances that the police made, all the mistakes they made in dealing with Anthony Ringel. The police start this operation, and they have some trouble getting Anthony to talk to them. So it's an undercover operation. Sometimes they call them Mr. Big operations up here in Canada, but it wasn't really a Mr. Big. It was really just police acting out roles, trying to get Anthony's trust in order to get him to talk to them. There wasn't really a Mr. Big character here, but your listeners won't care about that. So they work with Anthony, the police, in these scenarios. They meet him in the trailer park. Then they meet him in an apartment, and they start trying to get him to talk. They take him to strip clubs. They take him on fishing trips. They take him out for pizza and pool and bowling. And he does not say a word to them. They cannot get Anthony to talk about anything to do with Christine Harron. I guess his lawyer must have impressed on him, don't talk about this again, kind of thing. Now you've gotten off, don't talk about it again. somebody eventually comes up with the idea, and I know that I'm probably trampling over all your questions here, but somebody eventually comes up with the idea after about 9 or 10 months of trying to get Anthony to say something. Hey, why don't we show him Dave Ridgen's documentary? It's a 20-minute documentary that went on the air for CBC. I kid you not, they show him, this is in February 2013. They start to show him my doc, which is 20 minutes long. It takes them 4 hours to show it to him. And he keeps rewinding it and playing it again. He confesses the whole thing once he starts watching the documentary. So the doc I made with the family member is what Anthony sees. He's seen it before. He knows it by heart almost. And he's showing it to the cops, like who he thinks are his friends. Yeah, this is a good part. Look at this part. So he's rehearsing what he did that day by watching the information that's coming out of the documentary. So it's the perfect trigger, and he confesses. So a few days after that, they arrest him. In 2016, there's a trial, and he's in jail for second-degree murder of Christine Harron. So that's an example of a really long-winded case. Started in 1993. Nothing happens until a guy confesses. That falls apart. I come into the thing with the family member. We make a documentary, and then it's used to get him back in jail. It's like a nutty story, but it's a great story. It's a great story. It's a great story for all people participating, the family, everybody. I mean, Marianne still doesn't know where Chrissy actually is. We went to look for her. That's another part of the story, and I'm going to continue with that. But the gavel fell, and that 10% of relief is in her life now. So that helped.
And what was it? Do you think it was his narcissism, or was it striking like an emotional chord that he watched the doc and confessed? If
you listen to the doc, I don't know if you guys listen to it, but he's indignant that some of the facts are wrong. And that, like, that he says I've filmed the wrong part of the river. Of course, I'm not going to know exactly where he went over because I don't know, right? So I'm filming based on what I'm reading in the documents. And I didn't film the exact part of the river where he took Chrissy over. So it helped him to create his own fact, like to correct the fact, right? So it was like his indignation that I didn't present exactly what went on. Plus, he has some very disturbing rationalizations for why he killed Christine that day, why he horribly raped Christine, which I kept many of the facts out of the SKS documentary because they're just too hard to stomach for family and anybody listening. He has his own weird reasons for having done that. Awful. And is indignant about that as well. So, whatever it was, it was a trigger. Every single element triggered him to say something more about what he did. And that's an example of the work doing what it's supposed to do in a way that I could never have predicted.
Yeah, that's quite an amazing story and experience for you as well, sort of jump-starting the case from your piece of work. Why did it take him 4 hours to watch? Because he kept stopping it and pointing things out?
He kept stopping it. Yeah, he kept stopping it and starting it and wanting to go back and rewatch something. And he was it obviously was something when it came out that really affected him. I think he'd watched it many times. I think it was like, Star Wars was his Star Wars somehow or something, but he knew every word, phrase, and he was guiding the police who already knew. I don't know that the police had actually watched it, or at least in the documents they've stated that they didn't watch it, which is probably smart. But they allegedly hadn't watched it, the UCs, the undercover officers. I just call them UCs in the piece because we're not allowed to name them. And there were men and women, not just guys. So he was interested, Anthony Ringo was interested in watching certain parts and pointing out errors, and then watching parts to sort of, I guess, kind of rationalize or justify why he had done what he did. And every single thing, he just dug the hole deeper and proved more and more that he had done it. And he was saying, he said things, he augmented things that he said before in 2004 when they interviewed him, and new things. So we knew that it was, new information, or at least we knew it was truthful. Truth markers. The truth markers were there that he had done this. It wasn't just him saying, I did it again. Without, and it wasn't just police screwing things up. This time they didn't screw things up. Now, it is true that in 2016 in the case, the defense tried very hard to get my documentary thrown out of evidence so that anything to do with the documentary wouldn't be valid, which would mean that the case would be gone again. But the judge didn't agree. And it was obvious why they disagreed. I mean, there's a whole circuitous reason why the judge disagreed, which I'm not going to sort of try to pretend to negotiate for your listeners. But basically, because some information from the first trial wasn't allowed, I included all the information in my doc. So Anthony, according to the defense, was watching information that had been disallowed. And he was only regurgitating disallowed information, but it didn't make sense to the judge, because how many times, I mean, this is where it gets confusing. How many times do you need to say, I did it? I mean, he says I did it, and that one was allowed, but the second I did it wasn't. You know, like, how many I did it's do you need to know? Like, you just need the first one. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of confusing to the listeners. So, but it doesn't really matter. The judge said this documentary is the reason he confessed in the ruling, and allowed it. So pretty cool, actually. I mean, I feel good about that. I'm not a great guy to talk about myself. I think that the documentary wouldn't have been made without Marianne, without the mother, without Chrissy's mother. She was amazing and wanted to talk to Anthony, still wants to talk to Anthony. We tried to get to him in his jail cell, and we're still going to try to talk to him. Like, I'm not going away, as we all know. So it's an ongoing story, and it's not over yet. Even though it feels like it's over, like true crime people will be like, oh, but he's in jail, it's over. What's the next case, Dave? It isn't over. Like, it's never over. These stories are the best and most useful when they're not over, for people and listeners.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Now, as part of his confession, why didn't he give information on where Christine's body was?
He did. In fact, he did give very specific locations about where she was, which happens to be in a floodplain. So every year, the river that they crossed, the Saugeen River in Hanover, floods. And it is true that the area where he says he left her was swampy and likely was a flood area. However, there is a faint hope that we can still find her remains in some way. We did try that in the podcast, and listeners will hear that. And there's reasons why we're going to have to keep trying. But it is something, again, we're not going away. And we do know where he said she was. Water rises, 3-4 feet every year there. So, and it's a fairly brisk river. So it doesn't mean that she's not there, though. It doesn't mean that there's some remnant that isn't there. And I love the cadaver dogs I work with. I trust them. And I know that in the right situation that we'll have a pretty good shot at it.
And I think I know the answer to this, or at least how you're going to answer it, but I'd just like to hear it. You said that some true crime fans will say the guy's locked up. What's the next case? But it's never over, and we know that. It's never over. Even when they do find a body, it's really never over for the family, because now it's just another set of elements that they're handling to move on. What's your feeling on that, like, term closure? Like, in this case, will there ever be closure?
I knew you were going to ask that. Yeah, I mean, closure, yeah. I think closure's bullshit. I think closure's actually a television production word. Or even radio a programming word. It's like, it's a 45-minute show with commercials. It's a TV hour. Get your closure in, you fucker, before the TV hour's done. And I just think closure is horseshit. And most families, in fact, all families I've worked with, think it's horseshit. So Anthony Ringel's in jail, and Marianne still has the loss, still has the questions, and some would even say now that, like, it's even the pressure to know that stuff is even worse now. Like, why don't I know it now? Even now, I don't know it. So some would say that it's even worse now that Anthony's in jail and it's over, but it's not over, because the family are trying to claw back. Like, their life that they've led for the last 30 years trying to solve this case, because that's a big empty for them too, right? They spent the entirety of that time totally reorienting themselves around the case. Suddenly the guy's in jail and there's no case anymore, and you can't keep pushing. Like, what's their purpose, right? Your purpose drops, the floor drops out from under you. And it's kind of weird for people to hear that. But it really takes time for family members to reorient themselves into actually having a life for themselves and trying to figure out what's okay, what's good for my happiness now. Like, how it's okay for me not to always be thinking about the case now. Maybe I don't have to know all those answers. Right. And that's part of the process.
Yeah. And you mentioned Christine's mom having 10% of relief now that the man who killed her daughter is behind bars.
Maybe 30%. Okay.
Yeah. No, I was wondering where you got that number. Was that from her, or that was...
No, it's just me making stuff up. But, between like percentages, if you want a number, I don't know. But some people would be like gleeful, I guess, to have the person in jail. But no family member I've worked with is satisfied just with that. I think Thomas Moore probably is the most satisfied family member I've worked with because he's gone from the beginning not knowing anything to the end knowing everything and being able to face the person themselves and talk to them about what happened at length over coffee in the guy's trailer. We met the guy who helped to kill his brother, and sat and had coffee with him while they were petting a dog together, and that's the full enchilada, that thing. And I think you can't you can't get much more than that, even though I'm still working with Thomas, on other cases, and we still talk. And I think it's important not to drop, it's just like a news story. It's over. Okay. See you later, dude. Like, I don't think that happens, and the friendship happens. We don't drop our friends just because the story's over, So 10%, I don't know. I said 10%. It's probably much more than that. But it takes a lot out of family members to work on these cases. It takes a lot out of us when we lose family members just from normal death. We don't reorient ourselves around researching why our father died of a heart attack or whatever, unless there's some, doctor's mistake or something. But for true crime or for crime victims, it's different, and it takes more time. The trauma is different, and the process that SKS leads them through, I think, is the positive thing for them, whether the guy's in jail or not. And it almost always is a guy, so I'm going to say a guy. The guy is in jail or not.
What's one of the examples you can use for a family member that surprised you in their behavior, good or bad?
Oh, well, I don't know that I've been surprised by family members' behavior. I've definitely been affected by family members' behavior. I've been affected, the most recent case, Angel Carlick's case, Angel's brother, and the effects on Angel's brother, Alex, the extent of the damage that the case has done on him. And of course, his mother was also murdered by a different person. You never underestimate how it affects people, and also never underestimate what you can learn from those people. And certainly I've learned probably more than I've given from all these folks. Not that I've particularly suffered from certain kinds of trauma or whatever, but I just feel like I've benefited from the contact I've had with them all. I don't know. I didn't answer your question, and I made it about an answer I wanted to give. But anyway,
it's all good. It's a good answer.
Now, how many episodes are going to be in season 9?
Yeah, I think it's 5 episodes. I'm just literally texting the executive how many episodes are in season 9. I think it's 5 episodes. God, I'm embarrassed.
I'm always coming with the hardball questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's the easy ones that I can. It's always dates and the easy questions like, when is this coming out? And I'm like, I don't know. I think it's 5. Let's just say 5 or 6. It's at least 5 episodes, season 9. Let's say that.
And how many other cases are you working on simultaneously? I get the feeling you've got a lot of balls in the air behind the scenes.
There's always a ton. I get probably 20 cases suggested a day from people on Facebook and emails. I get like some Hollywood guy asking to do a series every week, probably once a week. There's people wanting to do a drama based on SKS. There is a drama based on SKS in development right now I'm working on as well. So there, in terms of cases ongoing, there's a whole case I've gathered mostly in the field already that I'm working on for season 10. And there's a season 11 that I've already gathered many of the elements for. And season 11 or season 12, I have good sense of what that will be. And then I've got probably about 6 update episodes that I'm working on at the same time for all the different seasons. So, and that's no word of bullshit. Lots of work. It's never ending.
Awesome. Well, okay. Where can folks hear you, find out more about you? Social media? You got any handles you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I mean, CBC is Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has its own it's called CBC Listen app that they listen to. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple, iTunes, SKS, Someone Knows Something. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, we'll have it if you just type Someone Knows Something. The Next Call is the other series I worked on as well. There was a recent resolution in one of those cases as well. Someone put in jail. But yeah, those are it. It's SKS. Someone Knows Something. Listen to it now.
Will do. Wow. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us here today, David. This was a really great chat.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
And now we're back for final thoughts. Lance, really interesting conversation with David Ridgen.
Really was. I mean, he comes across in this sort of complex way, right?
Yeah.
This juxtaposition of somebody who doesn't like talking about themselves, but understands that he has to use the media in order to get the story out so that his investigation can shake something loose, so that he can have some sort of productive thing come out of this whole thing, and he can't do it without talking about himself. So it's,
right.
We were talking earlier, like how some of the stuff that he's so dead serious about, like I don't know, was it like a nervous laugh or something? I felt like anxious because of the way he would deliver his answers.
Yeah, he was kind of funny in the conversation. I know listening back, and I think I cut out of a lot of my audible laughs, but you'd see them on the YouTube version. But I don't know if it was just the way he spoke or how blunt he was. But I don't know. He just was kind of making me laugh at times, even though he was really like dead serious, and does a great show and has really changed lives with his work and solved crimes. Like it's extremely impressive. The story about his documentary, getting the confession from that guy, and it taking him 4 hours to watch a 20-minute documentary was crazy to me, because I mean, when we spoke about it in the conversation, because he just kept stopping it. Like if that's not a little bit of a confession in itself, like I don't know what is.
Stopping it to say you got this wrong, or you got to see this part again. Like he's stopping it in a way that a super fan stops their favorite movie and
right.
is so passionate about it. It is a weird confessional type behavior.
Right.
But how do you tell this story as David did, someone who doesn't like talking about themselves but is in podcasting, doing these investigations and using the media to help him? It must be such like this personal torture for him to see something that he's done, and now he has to talk about, like he can't not talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, and he does it in his own show too, right? And Someone Knows Something, but obviously, like, you know, he doesn't get interviewed on that show. He shares what he writes and you know, things like that. But yeah, I guess when you created a show and you're the host and writer and producer, like you're expecting a certain amount of control in your projects, and you don't know what we're going to ask. You know, maybe that's part of it. Because, you know, I think this part may have gotten cut, but I even asked him, like, oh, how many episodes in the new season? And he's like, he got like, not annoyed at me, but like, he's like a little flustered. He's like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't do that stuff. I don't talk. I have no idea. He really didn't know.
Yeah, he had to like go to his phone or something and look it up. And
he messaged his, you know, someone at the CBC about it. Yeah, he was like, I think it's 5. Let me just ask.
Yeah, let's just go with this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of that did get cut out, but But yeah, so he's obviously very focused on his mission, and his mission is changing lives. So we really wish him the best, and we're really lucky to have such a great guest on this show.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, just that example of him not knowing how many episodes are in a season just shows where his priorities are. Like, I'll do the investigation, record, I'll do what needs to be written to make the narrative, go from one, point to the next point to make it fluid, but I got to focus on the investigation. Like, how many episodes? I don't know. My investigation is my investigation, and I don't operate by episodes. So,
yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, it sounded like he just had a lot of cases that he was working on at all times. Like, I'm not sure how he keeps them all straight, because it's a little here, a little there, and then he'll focus on one to produce a season and things like that. But yeah, it's because he does a lot of update episodes too, as he spoke about. So
right.
Yeah, very very impressed with his work. Make sure to check out Someone Knows Something. And thanks a lot for listening here today, folks. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we're having a lot of fun with these final thoughts. We hope everybody who's listening gets something out of them. I feel like we're getting into a rhythm doing this, and we really appreciate everybody sticking with us to the end. Even if you maybe skipped ahead at certain places, we still appreciate you. So, yeah, thank you so much.